Welcome to the final episode of the year for the Mindset Recruiting Podcast. I'm Alex Rojas, your talent advisor and host. And in today's episode, it's all about the 2024 best recruiting episodes. Welcome to the 49th episode of the year. It's fitting to kick off the 50th episode in 2025. And wow, I want to let that sink in just for a few seconds here. What a year it has been. I kicked this YouTube channel podcast back in January of 2024. And honestly, I didn't know what to expect. It was a podcast that initially started off as the Top 1%er or the Top 1% Recruiting Podcast, and it evolved and got rebranded. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But it's always been designed to provide valuable and compelling and encouraging content for my colleagues, for recruiters within the talent acquisition industry. And in this episode, I want to be able to provide you what I consider 3 game-changing, insightful, and trending mindset episodes that I think you're going to want to go back and take a look at if you didn't get a chance to view it this year. I'm going to break it down by really the most watched, the biggest trends, and the most controversial episodes that I actually recorded as well. And stick around for my closing commentary because I'm going to give you my personal favorite episode that I believe is a must-see, must-watch episode as well. I'm ready, I'm pumped, I'm excited. Let's discuss. Okay, so let's kick this thing off. These are the 3 what I would consider best episodes for the Mindset Recruiting Podcast, and I wanted to get ahead and provide you some context behind that. So I'm just going to highlight each one of these episodes, and within the description, you're going to find the links to each one of these episodes, and I highly encourage you to go back and take some time to view these because this is the most interaction and engagement that I received out of the 49 episodes that were posted in 2024. So number 1, the most watched episode for the Mindset Recruiting Podcast was no other than the 5 career changes for recruiters to consider. And so really what this episode was all about was about job roles to consider if a recruiter was transitioning or thinking about getting out of talent acquisition. I mean, this episode landed right in the middle of the year, and the talent acquisition industry as we know it was at a free fall. Companies were not hiring recruiters were laid off, were in between assignments, and it was a pretty sketchy point at the midpoint of this year. So recruiters were pretty desperate, and a lot of recruiters actually ended up considering other options and going outside of outside of talent acquisition. And so many of them did leave the industry, but there were also many that came into the industry sort of during that post-pandemic phase as well. So this was an episode that really resonated with a lot of recruiters that were kind of in a standstill, weren't sure what was going to happen with talent acquisition industry. And these 5 career changes that I provided in this episode was very insightful and very helpful for recruiters to consider other options within their careers. Number 2, the biggest trending episode of the year was when, actually it was a kind of a tie. They kind of go hand in hand. It's actually when the episodes were called Recruiters Will Work for Food. That was episode number 23. And then episode number 39, Recruiters Getting Hired. So they work hand in hand because the Recruiters Will Work for Food was at that point where there was desperation, and then all of a sudden the recruiters getting hired was, oh my gosh, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And so in that particular week, my LinkedIn postings were really kind of covered everything from not hiring recruiters, which was at the mid-year point, and then just a couple of months ago, hiring resuming again, finishing the year strong. And really that's what we've been experiencing within the talent acquisition industry in the last quarter of the year is that uptick. Now, whether we expect and project that the momentum will continue into 2025, we believe so. I don't think it'll go back to 2022 levels, but at the middle point of next year, we could see some very strong, healthy indications that that might actually be happening. And then the third episode that I want to highlight that I believe is the best episode, and this is going to be the most controversial episode, and it was a two-parter. It was human resources versus talent acquisition, the battle within. It was episodes number 30 and 31. And really, it was all about why human resources and talent acquisition, why they don't get along. And in the next episode that followed that was how can they learn to get along? And so between the LinkedIn postings that I did and the commentary that I had within the YouTube channel, this probably promoted the most conversations within the industry. And I had a lot of comments. I had a lot of suggestions. I had a lot of insights into that. And so I thought it was a very valuable, very controversial episode as well. And something also to consider is, as a side note, hiring managers, the good, the bad, and the ugly was also a very compelling and controversial episode that I would say came in really closely right behind that as well. So those are the top 3 best episodes of the year in the Recruiting Mindset podcast. Okay, so time for closing commentary, mindset time. And really what I wanted to do on this particular segment was to share my personal favorite episode. Out of the 49 episodes that I was able to record this year, I released episode number 13 back in May of 2024. And it was actually that point where I rebranded this YouTube channel podcast and went from Top 1% Recruiting podcast over to the Mindset Recruiting podcast. And so it was a rebranded podcast moment where I introduced this episode. It was a kickoff episode for the rebranding of the Mindset Recruiting podcast. And it was the 5 greatest of all time recruiters. And so I really broke this episode down. I really went through this process of really trying to identify what I believe to be were the 5 best recruiters of all time, the GOATs. And so coming in at number 5 was Steve Jobs. Number 4 was Walt Disney himself. Number 3 was Martin Luther King. Number 2 was Uncle Sam. And then the number 1 GOAT of all time recruiters was no other than Jesus Christ. And I believe that this is a must-watch episode. If you were not able to see that, I would highly recommend that you go back and take a look at the 5 GOATs and what kind of impact that they made not only on society and culture and personally. And so their lives or these institutions has been very inspiring. And especially for me as a believer, what my Lord and Savior has done for me this year has truly been a blessing. And I'll continue to work hard and smarter into 2025. And I'm excited to bring you more compelling content and continue growing this community. I hope this episode was informative. Please remember to like, to subscribe, to comment, to share. And until next time, remember, it's all about the mindset.